Hello everyone, this is Mason Foytik, and this is the Mason Foytik Podcast, Episode 3. So in Episode 3, we're going to be talking about squats and deadlifts. Okay, two big lifts that are really talked about a lot, to do them, not to do them, how to do them, and I kind of want to dive into that. So let's start with the squat. So first off, I kind of want to start with kind of the nature of a squat. So if you think in evolutionary terms, that there was obviously a necessity to get into a squat. Okay, all the functions and movements that humans perform right now, or you can see now the lack of movement, but up to the time of, when a baby is born, let me back up before I get to that. All the movements in evolutionary time that humans performed, our ancestors, were obviously a necessity, an adaptation to survival, and the skills needed to live back then, to gather, to hunt, to, get away from predators, etc., right? So if you look at kind of, the hips, knees, flexion, extension, rotation, all these singular joint movements, and then the coupling of movements that add into, your functional movements now of lunges, squats, deadlifts, presses, pulls. These were all developed, and you don't get to choose to have these movements. When you're born as a baby, there's a natural pattern of developing muscles and movements, okay? Right? When babies are born, they're born on their back, and then they flip over their stomach, right? They start forming that C curvature, that lordotic curvature in their neck. They start crawling, right? And so they start getting the weight bearing on their shoulders, start developing their shoulder muscles. And then, also they're curious and adventurous, right? So they're grabbing onto things, and this is causing them to kind of get up on their 2 feet and be bipedal, right? And as they do that, they start learning to walk. They start creating their intrinsic foot muscles, their arches, to support their body weight in that upright position. And then, once they get past that, and maybe not past it, within that kind of development, you'll see them in a squat position. It's really effortlessly, right? And the software in babies, it's innate, right? They're not choosing necessarily consciously to get in a squat position. It's sort of the genetic pull from evolution that this is a necessity. So in the evolution of human beings, it obviously kept it in the systematic growth. And sorry about that. And what I want to pull from that is that, the comments on functional movements nowadays, it's kind of in a weird place, right? Because you're trying, it's not wrong to say the functional movements in societal standards is to not get in a below 90 squat. For example, kind of analyze your day and see if in any part of your day, at least in Western culture, the Western world, see if you're ever in a below 90 squat, right? At work, at home, cooking, etc., playing with your kids. You're not in this position a lot. So who's to say a below 90 degree squat is functional in today's world, right? You go over to the Eastern world, kind of in the Asian culture, they're in the position a lot more. That's just the culture they are, and I tended to kind of agree with kind of what they're at, because it's more in line with which I believe is the actual movements and positions that humans should be in, right? But back over to the Western world, you're not really ever in a below 90 squat, okay? So when you go train or you see these videos, and I agree with them, right, that you should be working on getting in a below 90 squat. It is going to be difficult in the beginning if you're not used to it. If all you've been doing your whole life is sitting down and your knees are always in 90 degrees of flexion, your hips are always in the 90 degrees of flexion, if not less than that, then trying to push your body into limits that you've never presented to it is going to be difficult in the beginning, right? That's not to say that it should be unnatural if it feels uncomfortable. Because again, look at babies, they do it effortlessly. Now you could argue that they're just more malleable, and they are, right? Their ligaments, tendons, and muscles, they're really trying, they're really soft and just, again, malleable. And so they're really just adapting to the stresses and the environment that the baby is put in or presented. And as you get older, you kind of accommodate to the world you're in. And so it's really easy to get out of being comfortable in this position. So, going into working on that, right, there's a lot of things going on. And one of the big things in the beginning is ankle dorsiflexion, okay? And pretty much what is happening there with that is when you go down in a squat, there needs to be a good amount of anterior tibial translation forward. And with this, your knee will kind of go forward as well. And if your calves are tight, right, your gastroc and your soleus, your Achilles tendon are tight, that is going to be hard to get into that position, into that amount of dorsiflexion that you need, right? Also, kind of the joint capsule down there, your talocrural joint, which is kind of this little bone that sits right under your tibia. And when you're squatting, your tibia kind of slides over this bone, and the bone, if that capsule is tight and that tibia is not able to translate over that talus, which is the name of the bone, then again, you won't be able to get into that position that you want to, right? So working on like general mobs for your ankle, like posterior mobilizations, you can do anterior mobilizations, and then stretching your calves and presenting consistent stress to that joint and muscle will help you kind of get into that position, right? So now, but think about it. You've been sitting all day and your ankles have never gotten into that position. You're going to have to apply a decent amount of stress consistently in order for your body to really adapt and to stay in this or be comfortable in this position of ankle dorsiflexion of a below 90 squat. Okay, so keep that in mind. It's not going to happen within a week, or maybe not, usually not even a month, but you keep working on it, it will happen. And then you go into, the more of the hips too. Again, sitting all day, hip flexors always in a shortened position, okay? Even your abdominals. And so these muscles tend to get tight, aka to me weak. And so when you get down in a below 90 squat, right, it requires a lot more hip flexion, okay? And so when you get down there, these muscles are weak, and the big part here, or tight, the big part here too is that the femur head, and the acetabular, your femoral acetabular joint, which is where the head of your femur goes into your hip bone. When you're squatting down, there's a natural mechanic where that femur bone needs to slide back and down in your hip capsule. And again, if all you've been presenting to that hip capsule is sitting in 9D and standing, it is going to be difficult in the beginning to get to that. Okay? And so I just really want to emphasize, you're going to have to mobilize your hips even more posteriorly and inferiorly, as well as stretching and strengthening your hip flexors. Okay? It's going to be a requirement, because if not, you're going to feel this pinching on the inside of your groin, and nobody likes that. It feels uncomfortable. So you really have to get that whole hip complex kind of more mobile and fluid and stronger in order for you to be comfortably sitting in a below parallel squat. Obviously, there's upper extremity things too, being over kyphotic, or the lack of thoracic extension is going to be difficult for that too, but I don't want to really get into that. But again, with the squat and then working on and getting into a below parallel squat, the evidence, or at least the general knowledge in the health profession probably 20, 30 years ago was, don't go below 90. This is not good for your knees. The stresses on your knees, it just doesn't turn out well, right? It comes out that we do more research. If you apply the right amount of stress starting off, and you slowly start adding more to where you're not putting yourself in a position to injure yourself. You don't injure yourself, and then you work your way down to presenting more stress. Your knees can comfortably get into a below 90 squat, and at the same time you're getting stronger. You can see this perfectly with the evolution of knee replacements. They used to not, or hip replacements, either way, they used to not have you walking on these joints after they cut the head of the bone off and replace it, right? But now they have you walking on the same day, because they're finding out the faster you can add stress to these joints, the faster they'll adapt, the stronger they'll get. So if you want to get comfortable in a below 90 squat, you need to start adding stresses. And again, it's a myth that below 90 is bad for your knees. Now, that's not to say that if you have intrinsic problems, surgeries, or any other major issues with your hips, knees, low back, etc., that you should not be doing things. I'm not saying that. As well as older demographics, especially if it's going to be hard. You can't teach an old dog new tricks. You can help them, let's say, delay sort of the onset of I'm losing my words here, of getting older. Man, my mind's everywhere. Getting older. But to get them into properly getting down into a full squat probably isn't the best idea, or the best use of time. Okay, so squatting, again, I believe you should be able to get below 90, but at the same time, there's a process to getting there, and take your time with it. You'll see the benefits from it as you get older. Yeah. Oh, and one more thing before I say that, when you have people with these psychological, they don't even have tissue or damage. It's more of a psychological damage, right? People don't want to bend their knees or bend their back. When you get in this mindset and you go through life like this, you're going to wear out the other system, the other mechanic system. What I mean by this is, if you have to pick something off the ground, you're going to do either a few things. You're going to bend over, you're going to bend your knees into a squat, maybe lunge, right? So if you are hesitant about bending your knees, you're always going to be bending over, right? Wear and tear on your back. If you're scared of bending over, you're always going to be bending down on your knees. This can be wear and tear on your knees. So again, it's good for the body to work in wholesome together, and for you to not be psychologically thinking about limiting certain movements if you are a healthy human being. Yeah. And now the deadlift. So deadlift, this is an interesting one. So there's a lot of hate on it, right? To stop doing it, or generally to just stop doing it, because there's more risk than reward from it. Now, if you're trying to lift the world and you're an amateur, or you haven't worked your way up to the weight, yeah, you're going to injure yourself. That's with every lift, right? So the logic of that runs with every lift in the fitness industry. But to say that you don't need to be doing it, or some form of a deadlift, is just dumb. I mean, in my opinion, right? The deadlift, human beings are posterior chain movers. Now, I don't mean only posterior chain movers, but we are stronger in our posterior side of our body. Okay? A deadlift is the best movement. You can couple this with the pull-ups, but with the best movement for strengthening that posterior chain. Okay? Now, a deadlift, let's get into this. A deadlift for me, so sumo deadlift and deadlift. A sumo deadlift, I don't necessarily like calling it a deadlift. It is a deadlift, but when I say deadlift, back to what I said, it's a posterior chain movement. When you're in a sumo deadlift position, you're in an upright torso position, and pretty much all you're doing is squatting the weight up. Now, it's not on your spine like a barbell squat, it's just on the floor. So you're just reiterating a squat with a different with the bar at a different center of gravity. And so you're really just reiterating the same movements, right? Now, I'm not saying sumo squats are bad or shouldn't be done. I don't think there's any movement intrinsically bad, right? Because you are getting exercise out of it. You're getting, musculature hypertrophy done. You're creating a movement pattern within that system. But for a deadlift, if you're only doing sumos, I would advise to add conventional deadlifts in, because now you're actually working on the posterior chain is getting exercised, right? And sort of the cues to see if you're in that position is if you're about to start your deadlift and your knees are over your toes, you're probably translated too forward, right? Your hamstrings need to be taut when you're about to lift the lift, when you're about to start your lift, okay? Hands should be engaged, and you should be torquing around the bar, not twerking, not torquing. So you're grabbing the bar or you're creating a rotational force by activating your external rotators, your rotator cuffs, and then applying posterior pressure with your lats and your teres major, creating a very tight, your thoracolumbar fascia is becoming very tight and taut, ready for the lift, right? And your hamstrings are taut, whole posterior chain is ready to lift, and then you lift up and you go in from hip flexion, right, into now you have your prime mover of your glutes. You'll be pushing your hips forward as you go through the deadlift, right? You'll get assistance from your hamstrings, but your glute max is your primary hip extender, okay? And again, with both squat and deadlifts, right, there are femur length and tibial length differences with the individuals, but that's not to say that it gives you the inability or the excuse not to be able to do these lifts. You're going to look different, but the general cues and positions are the same. You might start with your butt higher on a deadlift, or you might start your butt a little lower depending on your skeletal makeup. But that's no excuse or reason for you to be able not to do these lifts. All right, I run the same thing with squat. So again, deadlifts, another functional movement. You can pick things up off the ground in that position, usually heavier things. Right, and so I just really want to emphasize that you should be doing both squats and deadlifts, not pushing these away. The huge functional lifts. There's obviously a reason that the body was made in order to sort of be in this position evolutionary wise, because we have the ability to do it. And last thing I want to say with deadlifts, kind of the curvature of the back. If you're starting off as an amateur, just getting in the gym, you really want to focus on keeping the spine neutral position. And when you're doing that, really develop your erectors and all the supporting stabilizer muscles, glute, and then your prime movers, your glutes and hamstrings. But as you get into more of the advanced stage, and you've already been deadlifting a while, and you'll see this in power lifters, you will get a little bit of flexion at the beginning of the lift if you're going really heavy, right? But these people have such strong erectors and core muscles. These muscles have the ability to hold the integrity of that flexion, okay? So it's not necessarily a bad or wrong way to lift. It's just when the body's flexing, this is the most, what's the word? I can't think of the word. Anyways, I can't think of the word. This is the amount of weight that you're pulling. The body assumes that this is a better position to create as much force as possible. And so it helps you lift the weight off the ground, right? When you flex the spine, you're stacking your spine a little bit more. Your erectors don't have to necessarily work as much, but then again they do. So again, keep doing these lifts, work on them, and don't let them get out of your life. All right, that is the end of the podcast, and I hope everyone has a great day. Bye.